The Freeway Killer, also known as the Freeway Strangler, was an American serial killer and a twice-paroled sex offender. Between May 1979 and June 1980, he brutally raped, tortured, and murdered at least 21 young men and boys. During at least 12 of these incidents, he received assistance from one of his 4 known accomplices, and he is also suspected of being involved in an additional 15 murders. The title Freeway Killer was attributed to him because most of his victims' bodies were found near various freeways in Southern California. Hello and welcome to Maida's reality channel, where we bring you compelling true crime stories. From unsolved mysteries to notorious criminals, we leave no stone unturned as we navigate the dark corridors of real-life crimes. So don't forget to give us a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button for more. Now let's get back to the story. Bonin's early life. William Bonin was born in Willimantic, Connecticut, on January 8, 1947, as the second of 3 sons to Robert Leonard Bonin Sr. and Alice Dorothy Coate. Both of his parents struggled with alcoholism, and his father, a World War II veteran, frequently subjected his wife and children to physical abuse. Meanwhile, Bonin's mother dealt with severe mood swings, often spending her free time at a bingo parlor, leaving her sons unattended at home. Her presence was described as domineering and emasculating in Bonin's early life. On the other hand, Bonin's father battled a gambling addiction that led to the loss of their home in Andover, Connecticut, in January 1950. After losing a high-stakes poker game, the family had to move in with Bonin's maternal grandmother in Willimantic. Despite this dysfunctional environment, Bonin and his brothers were raised in the Catholic faith and attended St. Mary's Catholic School. Bonin's aggressive behavior, truancy, and other misconduct led to repeated complaints from school staff. He even found himself in juvenile hall briefly after a bike-related incident with young girls. In September 1953, Bonin and his older brother were sent to the Franco-American School, a Catholic convent in Lowell, Massachusetts, known for harsh physical discipline. Despite the mistreatment, Bonin functioned relatively well in this environment, although he was bullied by other children. In 1955, he claimed to have been sexually assaulted by an older boy at the convent. The convent's disciplinary measures included beatings, stress positions, pacing staircases, and, in extreme cases, partial drowning in sinks filled with ice water. Despite the abuse, Bonin adapted to the controlled environment, but he later refused to discuss his memories of the 3 years spent at the convent. Neither of Bonin's parents visited him during his time at the convent, and he believed they might have died. He remained at the convent until May 31, 1955, when he returned to live with his parents in Mansfield, Connecticut. In Mansfield, he attended Annie Vinton Elementary School, where he gained a reputation as a juvenile delinquent. Ashamed of his sexual attractions, Bonin struggled to relate with others, so he isolated himself. Residents in the neighborhood observed a notable absence of active parental engagement in the lives of Bonin and his younger brother. A compassionate neighbor, moved by their unkempt and hungry state, occasionally stepped in to offer meals and provide clean clothes for the siblings. From their early years until 1957, Bonin and his siblings were frequently placed under the care of their maternal grandfather, who had sexually abused their mother into her adulthood. Their mother also suspected him of molesting his grandsons. With no parental oversight, Bonin began engaging in petty crimes, such as stealing hubcaps, license plates, and metal tags from vehicles around town. In 1957, he was placed in a juvenile detention center for these offenses, where he experienced molestation by an adult counselor. Upon his release, Bonin began sexually fondling his younger brother, Paul. After 6 months, their mother discovered the misconduct, leading Bonin's parents to enforce separate sleeping arrangements. Bonin later admitted to fondling and orally copulating with younger boys, as well as engaging in inappropriate behavior with a 10-year-old girl. During adolescence, he even attempted incest with an older female cousin. Bonin attended middle school adjacent to Coventry High School in 1959 and 1960, displaying strong aptitude in math and science, but achieving otherwise mediocre grades. In late 1960, the family faced foreclosure due to Bonin's father's gambling habits. However, his parents reconciled and relocated to Torrance, California, in early 1962, after his father secured a well-paying job as a machinist. At North High School in Torrance, Bonin became a social outcast, feeling uncomfortable in the presence of peers. Despite his younger brother's recollections of him as an outwardly well-behaved teenager, Bonin had few friendships and frequently missed school, facing suspension on one occasion. By his teenage years, Bonin developed an obsessive interest in pedophilia, keeping it a secret. His emerging homosexuality led to conflicts with his mother, resulting in frequent arguments. Bonin rarely pursued relationships with girls, but he briefly dated a classmate named Linda after turning 17, in an attempt to please his mother despite feeling uncomfortable in the relationship. After dropping out of high school in 1966, Bonin started luring and molesting neighborhood children. His mother, seemingly oblivious to these acts and his escalating antisocial behavior, eventually evicted him from the household for undisclosed reasons. Bonin's military service. Without much drive and often relying on financial support from his parents, Bonin enlisted in the United States Air Force in December 1966 with his mother's encouragement. Upon returning home, Bonin got engaged to Linda. The engagement, primarily at the urging of his mother, was intended to suppress Bonin's homosexuality. During his military service, he earned his general equivalency diploma and served as a cook in Alaska. Although arrested for theft in 1967, the charges were dropped due to his impending deployment to Vietnam. Stationed in Phu Loy Base Camp, Bonin served actively in the 205th Assault Support Helicopter Unit, accumulating over 700 hours of combat and patrol time. After nearly 2 years in the Air Force, Bonin received an honorable discharge in October 1968 at the age of 21. Upon his return home, he discovered that Linda, who had given birth to their son, had left him to marry another man. Bonin's recurring nightmares involving the sexual assault and murder of a young woman, which he had disclosed during their engagement, may have contributed to the strain on their relationship and his subsequent frustration. First conviction. On November 17, 1968, William Bonin encountered 14-year-old Billy Jones in Arcadia, California, while driving his mother's white Chevrolet station wagon. Pretending to offer a ride home, Bonin interrogated the youth about homosexuality, causing Jones to attempt an escape. Bonin handcuffed him and proceeded to rape him, rendering him unconscious in the process. Bonin left Jones at a park bench, and his mother promptly reported the incident to the police. On November 26, 1968, around midnight, Bonin picked up 17-year-old hitchhiker John Treadwell of Torrance. Bonin questioned him about homosexuality, accelerated the vehicle, and brandished a handgun. After parking in a secluded area, Bonin raped Treadwell and threatened him, claiming he had friends who would retaliate if he reported the assault. During the attack, Treadwell was also assaulted with a tire iron. On December 4, 1968, 17-year-old Alan Pruitt reported to the Torrance Police Department that a man fitting Bonin's description had offered him a ride, deviated from the highway, and subjected him to extensive sexual assault. The suspect, visibly angered, questioned the minor about the presence of homosexuals in the world. 5 weeks later, on January 1, 1969, Bonin offered a ride to 12-year-old Lawrence Bretman in Hermosa Beach, California. Despite the boy's pleas, Bonin threatened and forced Bretman to perform oral sex at gunpoint, molesting and robbing him. Bonin warned Bretman against reporting the incident, threatening to kill him. On January 12, 1969, at around 9:00 p.m., Bonin picked up 18-year-old hitchhiker Jesus Monge, inquiring about homosexuality and offering him $20 for oral sex. When Monge attempted to exit the vehicle, Bonin physically assaulted him, handcuffed him, and forced him to perform oral sex. During the assault, Bonin made threatening statements and sodomized Monge. Local police, at this point, intensified efforts to apprehend a potential serial rapist matching Bonin's description. On January 28, 1969, at 2:30 a.m., an El Segundo policewoman confronted Bonin, who had frightened 16-year-old runaway Timothy Wilson present with him in his mother's vehicle. Recognizing Bonin's frantic state and similarity to the rapist's profile, she searched him and found handcuffs. During the arrest, Bonin repeatedly urged her to incarcerate him, sobbing and claiming he wasn't in control of his actions. Bonin faced indictment on 5 counts of kidnapping, 4 counts of sodomy, 1 count of oral copulation, and 1 count of child molestation related to the 5 victims he had abducted and assaulted since the previous November. In each case, Bonin had restrained his victims before engaging in forcible sodomy, oral copulation, and torturous methods such as bludgeoning with a tire iron, choking, and testicle squeezing. In March 1969, Bonin underwent 2 psychiatric examinations, revealing him as a sexual psychopath with little impulse control, signs of depression, and inappropriate emotional responses. Initially denying childhood abuse, he later confessed to being fondled at age 8 and suspected molestation between 9 and 12 years old. In May 1969, Bonin admitted guilt to a probation officer regarding molesting male youths, expressing a desire to start a family and become a pilot upon release. He attributed his criminal behavior to his Vietnam service, emphasizing difficulties in forming relationships since returning. The final evaluation depicted him as lacking insight and responsibility for crimes committed since childhood. Bonin pleaded guilty to molestation and forced oral copulation, resulting in a sentence to the Atascadero State Hospital in June 1969 as a mentally disordered sex offender considered amenable to treatment. Incarceration at Atascadero. Upon arriving at the Atascadero State Hospital on June 17, 1969, William Bonin underwent a series of psychiatric examinations. The evaluations revealed that he possessed an above-average IQ of 121 and exhibited traits of manic depression, sexual sadism disorder, and antisocial personality disorder. Despite the absence of significant brain anomalies, a physical examination uncovered extensive scars on Bonin's head and buttocks, likely acquired during his time at the Franco-American orphanage. Bonin claimed no memory of these scars, leading experts to conclude that he repressed memories of extreme childhood abuse. Bonin actively participated in group therapy sessions during his time at Atascadero. Psychiatrists noted his defensive and aggressive attitude toward other patients and his refusal to acknowledge his homosexuality. He openly discussed his intentions to harm potential future victims, leading to his classification as an extreme sociopath with a high probability of recidivistic behavior during psychotic breakdowns. Bonin's challenging methods of social interaction hindered his treatment, yet he willingly engaged in experimental programs, portraying himself as a nonviolent, helpful, and conscientious patient to staff. He also believed he could manipulate psychiatrists into granting him an early release. On July 7, 1971, due to repeated sexual engagement with inmates, 2 of whom were mentally challenged, Bonin was transferred to the California Medical Facility. In prison, further psychiatric examinations delved into his hostility toward his father and older brother. These evaluations noted that Bonin's sexual behaviors were compulsive responses to stress. On one occasion, Bonin sought to raise money for another prisoner's family and willingly applied for at least 1 treatment program. On June 11, 1974, doctors concluded that he was no longer a danger to the health and safety of others, resulting in Bonin's release from prison. In July 1974, Bonin rented an apartment in Hollywood to socialize with the adult gay community, but he faced difficulties due to poor social skills. He eventually relocated to his parents' new house in Downey, California, briefly working as a bartender in Fountain Valley. After becoming a truck driver at Dependable Drive-Away in December 1974, He was terminated in February 1975 for wrecking a trailer. Bonin attended community college classes and established a serious relationship with a single mother after picking up hitchhikers for potential sexual partners. On September 8, 1975, while cruising for young boys, Bonin encountered 14-year-old David Allen McVicker hitchhiking in Garden Grove. After McVicker entered Bonin's vehicle, he was questioned about homosexuality. When McVicker expressed discomfort and asked to leave, Bonin produced a gun and drove him to a deserted field. There, Bonin subjected McVicker to sexual assault, beating him and simultaneously strangling him. Despite McVicker pleading for his life, Bonin apologized, reverted to casual conversation, and even masturbated before driving McVicker home. Traumatized, McVicker reported the incident to a child abuse hotline and informed his mother, leading to Bonin's arrest on October 11, 1975, for the assaults. When arrested, Bonin warned law enforcement that there would be no witnesses next time. Charged with the rape, forcible oral copulation of a minor, and attempted abduction of a 15-year-old boy, Bonin pleaded guilty to both charges. On December 31, 1975, he was sentenced to serve between 1 and 15 years in prison at the California Men's Facility in San Luis Obispo. In 1977, further psychiatric examination suggested that Bonin's sexual involvement with young boys was related to his mother's micromanagement of his life. While incarcerated, Bonin completed mathematics courses and underwent vocational training as a machinist, amassing over 2,400 hours. Displaying significant progress in individual therapy sessions, he was released from detention on October 11, 1978, but placed under 18 months supervised probation. On November 1, 1978, Bonin relocated to an apartment complex at Downey's Kingswood Village, approximately 1 mile from his parents' house. There, he befriended 43-year-old neighbor and former bank officer Everett Scott Fraser. Bonin became a regular attendee at Fraser's frequent parties, held almost nightly for several months, where young men, drugs, and alcohol were abundant. Fraser viewed Bonin as respectful and polite, frequently introducing him to young male acquaintances. The two exchanged stories of their experiences with teenage boys. Through these gatherings, Bonin got to know 21-year-old porcelain factory worker and part-time magician Vernon Robert Butts, as well as 18-year-old Gregory Matthews Miley. Butts, who had attempted suicide on multiple occasions due to an obsession with death and witchcraft, later admitted to taking delight in watching Bonin abuse victims. He insisted his participation in the murders was driven primarily by fear of Bonin. 1979. In the following month, Bonin developed a relationship with a married mother with a criminal record for child cruelty. They frequented activities like roller skating, attending church services, and bowling together. After Bonin's parole supervision ended in April 1979, he and his younger brother Paul, a plumber, moved to the rural community of Silverado, California, where they operated a short-lived neighborhood bar named the Alpine Inn. Facing challenges such as noise violations and the inability to secure a permanent liquor license due to Bonin's criminal record, the business venture closed up. On July 19, 1979, Bonin purchased a 1972 Ford E100 shorty van, while still residing in Silverado with his younger brother, briefly working for him under his new plumbing business. On August 4, 1979, Bonin and Butts drove from Silverado Canyon to a drive-in movie theater in Westminster. During the journey, Bonin proposed the heinous idea of raping and murdering a teenage hitchhiker. Butts agreed, setting the stage for a gruesome event involving 17-year-old Mark Shelton. Bonin offered Shelton $400 for sexual services, initiating a horrific sequence of abuse. As they ventured into the Cajon Pass in San Bernardino County, Butts entertained Shelton with magic tricks before he was subjected to sexual assault and violence. Shelton's resistance enraged Bonin, leading to a brutal beating and strangulation, assisted by Butts. The assault included the use of foreign objects, resulting in fatal shock. Shelton's lifeless body was callously discarded beside a gravel road in the Cajon Pass. The following day, on August 5, 1979, Bonin and Butts encountered 17-year-old West German student Marcus Grabs attempting to hitchhike from the Pacific Coast Highway. Bonin claimed consensual relations, but the encounter turned violent as Grabs was bound and subjected to intimidation. Bonin repeatedly stabbed Grabs during a prolonged assault, and his lifeless body was later found in Malibu Creek, displaying extensive injuries. Despite Bonin's detainment on August 9, 1979, for molesting a 17-year-old in Dana Point, an administrative error led to his release before his scheduled court date. On August 13, 1979, Fraser picked up Bonin from jail, and during the ride home, Bonin made a statement that Fraser interpreted as remorseful, expressing a belief that no one would testify against him again. Resuming his killing spree, Bonin failed to appear for his court appointment, and he returned to his parents' house, gradually gaining a reputation as a child molester. On August 20, 1979, he picked up 18-year-old Robert Wierostek, offering him $50 for acts of oral copulation. Wierostek was bound, raped, tortured, and eventually murdered, with his body found alongside Interstate 10 on September 27, 1979. On August 27, 1979, Bonin and Butts abducted 15-year-old Hollywood youth Donald Ray Hayden at approximately 1:00 a.m. on Santa Monica Boulevard. Fearful of Butts, Bonin reassured Hayden and offered him $50 for sexual services, soon engaging in consensual intercourse while Butts drove the van. Butts later performed oral sex on Hayden's corpse before the duo dumped the body at a construction site near the Ventura Freeway, which was then discovered hours later. On September 9, 1979, Bonin lured 17-year-old La Mirada youth David Louis Murillo cycling to a movie theater into his van. After entering the van, Bonin offered him money for sex, which Murillo rejected. However, Bonin went on to fondle Murillo before binding him and dragging to Butts' residence. As Butts drove, Bonin forced the boy to perform oral sex on him before squeezing his genitals and sodomizing him. He then traded places with Butts, who performed oral sex on, and beat Murillo before squeezing his genitals in frustration because Murillo didn't have an erection. Afterward, they parked the vehicle at a deserted spot where they bound Murillo, repeatedly raped him, and later smashed his skull with a tire iron. His nude body was thrown out of the van and over an embankment into a bed of ivy alongside Highway 101. Murillo's body was later discovered on September 12, 1979. Bonin stopped killing for a while until November 1, 1979, when he and Butts abducted and murdered an unidentified young man with brown hair, whom Bonin claimed to be 5 feet 6 inches tall and 18 years of age. This victim was savagely beaten repeatedly by both captors, then strangled to death by Bonin before his fully clothed body was discarded in an irrigation ditch alongside State Route 99, south of Bakersfield. Approximately 4 weeks later, on November 30, Bonin, operating alone, abducted 17-year-old Bellflower youth Frank Dennis Fox. During the process of ligature strangulation, Bonin killed the youth while still sodomizing him. His body was found 2 days later alongside the Ortega Highway, 5 miles east of San Juan Capistrano. The body bore signs of extensive blunt force trauma to the face and head, with ligature marks on the wrists and ankles indicating Fox had been bound throughout his ordeal. 10 days after the murder of Fox, 15-year-old Long Beach youth John Frederick Kilpatrick was offered money for sexual services after leaving his parents' home to meet with his friends. After engaging in mutual oral copulation, the teenager was bound and raped by Bonin in the van before being transported to his parents' house, where he was extensively flagellated with a string until he cried and strangled to death with the string. Kilpatrick's body was discarded in a remote area of Rialto, and it was later found on December 13. Kilpatrick remained known as a John Doe until August 5, 1980. 1980. On January 1, 1980, Bonin lured 16-year-old Ontario youth Michael Francis McDonald near the Chino airport. Under the guise of providing drugs for him to sell, Bonin parked behind an apartment building before binding the boy by knife point. Beating the youth into submission, McDonald performed oral sex on Bonin before being subject to genital squeezing and rape in the van. His fully clothed body was found alongside Highway 71 on the outskirts of Chino, although his body was not identified until March 24. On the morning of February 3, 1980, Bonin invited a 16-year-old boy into his parents' house to drink and engage in intercourse. When Bonin briefly departed to urinate, he allegedly caught the youth stealing $100 from his billfold. Furious, Bonin resolved to commit a murder. Later that evening, Bonin drove from Downey to Hollywood with Gregory Miley with the specific intention of committing a murder with him. They encountered 15-year-old Charles Miranda standing close to the Starwood nightclub, hitchhiking along Santa Monica Boulevard. After Bonin had molested Miranda, Miley also attempted to rape Miranda but was unable to sustain an erection. In frustration, Miley assaulted the youth with various sharp objects before assisting Bonin in beating him. Bonin then strangled Miranda to death with a t-shirt and a tire iron as Miley repeatedly jumped on Miranda's chest. His nude corpse was dumped shortly thereafter in an alleyway alongside East 2nd Street in Los Angeles. 5 minutes after the two had discarded Miranda's body, Bonin suggested they do another. A few hours later, in Huntington Beach, the pair encountered 12-year-old James McCavey standing at a bus stop on the corner of Beach Boulevard and Slater Avenue. Temporarily left alone, McCavey had been dropped off there by his older brother, who had given Maccabee money and with whom he stayed for the weekend. McCavey was lured into Bonin's van on the promise he would be driven to his intended destination of Disneyland for free with the additional incentive of marijuana. According to Miley, McCavey entered the van voluntarily, after which Bonin drove to a grocery store parking lot, where he began hugging and kissing the child. After raping the child, Bonin and Miley ended up strangling McCavey to death with his own t-shirt before discarding his corpse alongside a dumpster at a construction site in Walnut City. McCavey's body was discovered 3 days later, fully clothed, bearing several skull fractures and a bruised manhood. 1 day after Miranda and Maccabee's murder, Bonin was arrested for violating the conditions of his parole. He was remanded in custody at the Orange County Jail until March 4. Following his release, he obtained more secure employment as a truck driver at his former Montebello workplace at Dependable Drive-Away, earning $5 an hour. While delivering trucks, Bonin frequently argued with his boss, who was unaware of his status as a sexual offender, for picking up a hitchhiker in his presence on one occasion and taking longer, unnecessary routes which detectives later took interest in. 10 days after Bonin's release from custody, on March 14, he abducted 18-year-old Van Nuys youth Ronald Gatlin. After assaulting the youth, Bonin began hacking at Gatlin's face with an ice pick. Gatlin was beaten and sodomized, suffering several deep, perforating ice pick wounds to the ear and neck before being strangled with a ligature. He also bore signs of extensive beating. The following day, his bound body was found behind an industrial building in the city of Duarte. 1 week later, on March 21, Bonin offered a ride to 14-year-old hitchhiker Glenn Norman Barker. Barker was also beaten and raped with objects, then strangled with a ligature. His neck had numerous burns made by a cigarette, and his rectum was extensively distended. At approximately 4:07 p.m. the same day, 15-year-old Russell Dwayne Rue was abducted from a bus stop in Garden Grove. Rue intended on hitching a ride to his job at a fast food restaurant before encountering Bonin. He was bound, beaten, and strangled to death after an estimated 8 hours of captivity before his body was discarded alongside that of Barker in Cleveland National Forest, close to the Ortega Highway. Both nude bodies were found on March 23, and both bore evidence of extensive beating and ligature marks on their wrists, ankles, and neck. One Friday evening in March 1980, Bonin offered 17-year-old William Ray Pugh a ride home as the pair left Fraser's residence. Within minutes of accepting the ride, Bonin asked Pugh whether he would like to engage in sex with him. Pugh later stated that he panicked and stuttered upon hearing this question, and after sitting in silence for several minutes, attempted to leave the vehicle once Bonin had slowed the van at a stoplight. In response, Bonin seized Pugh by the collar, dragging him back into the passenger seat. According to Pugh, Bonin entered an irritable state before confiding in him that he enjoyed abducting young male hitchhikers on Friday and Saturday nights, so he had time to take his girlfriend roller skating on Sundays, adding that he restrained and abused youths before strangling them to death with their own T-shirts. Bonin further explained that he had not chosen to refrain from sexually assaulting and murdering Pugh out of sentiment. He had been spared because the pair had been seen leaving Fraser's party together. Pugh was driven to a home he claimed was his, before fearfully sprinting to his residence upon the van's departing. On March 25, 1980, Bonin and Pugh abducted 15-year-old runaway Harry Todd Turner from a Los Angeles street. Turner had absconded from a boys' home in the desert community of Lancaster 4 days prior to his meeting Bonin and Pugh. Pugh was to later testify that he and Bonin lured Turner into Bonin's van with an offer of $20 for intimacy. After binding and sodomizing the youth, Bonin bit into Turner's manhood until it tore and bled. Bonin then ordered Pugh to beat Turner up. After Pugh had bludgeoned and beat Turner about the head and body for several minutes, Bonin strangled Turner to death with his own T-shirt and a tire iron before discarding his body at the rear delivery door to a Los Angeles business. His genitals were mutilated, and he had 8 skull fractures inflicted by a blunt instrument. On April 10, Bonin was discharged from parole following his March 4, 1980, release. He encountered 16-year-old Bellflower youth Stephen John Wood walking to school. Wood's older brother had introduced him to Bonin, so he willingly entered Bonin's van. His nude, hot-eyed, and extensively beaten body was discarded in a Long Beach alleyway beside a dumpster, with his head resting against a nearby bench close to the Pacific Coast Highway. Wood's autopsy revealed the youth had been killed by ligature strangulation. Barely 3 weeks later, on April 29, Bonin encountered 19-year-old supermarket employee Darren Kendrick while parked on the grounds of the Stanton supermarket where Kendrick worked. Bonin lured Kendrick into his van on the pretext of selling the youth drugs. Bonin then drove to Butt's apartment in Lakewood, where the trio began listening to music as they sat on the couch. When Bonin asked Kendrick whether he was gay, Kendrick attempted to flee, but Bonin and Butts overpowered and bound him, and Butts sodomized him. Bonin raised the volume of Butts' sound system to cover Kendrick's screams. Butts then held Kendrick's mouth open while Bonin poured chloral hydrate down his throat, causing Kendrick to sustain caustic chemical burns to his mouth, chin, stomach, and chest. Bonin then strangled Kendrick as Butts drove an ice pick into Kendrick's ear, causing a fatal wound to the youth's cervical spinal cord. His body was discarded behind a warehouse close to the Artesia Freeway with the ice picks still protruding from his ear. On May 12, 1980, Bonin abducted and murdered one of his acquaintances, whom he later stated he had decided to kill when he had awoken that morning because he was tired of having him around. The body of 17-year-old Lawrence Sharp was discarded behind a Westminster gas station. His body was found on May 18, and his autopsy revealed that in addition to being bound and sodomized, Sharp had been extensively beaten about the face and body, then strangled with a ligature. 1 week after the murder of Sharp, on the afternoon of May 19, Bonin asked Butts to accompany him on a killing. On this occasion, however, Butts reportedly refused to accompany him. Operating alone, Bonin abducted 14-year-old Southgate youth Sean King from a bus stop in Downey. King was strangled to death before his body was discarded in Live Oak Canyon, Yucaiba. Bonin then visited Butts' residence and bragged of the killing to his accomplice. Investigation and surveillance. In early 1980, the murders orchestrated by Bonin and his associates garnered significant media attention. Leading gay rights activists offered a substantial $50,000 reward for information leading to the conviction of the perpetrator or perpetrators, intensifying the public interest. Bonin closely followed media reports on his crimes, even collecting newspaper clippings detailing the manhunt against him. He, along with his accomplices, frequently tuned in to radio and television coverage of the ongoing investigations. As the authorities connected various murders within the past year, investigators from multiple jurisdictions where victims were either abducted or found started collaborating and sharing crucial information to track down the perpetrator. Forming a task force, 6 officers from 3 jurisdictions, frequently targeted by the Freeway Killer for abductions or body disposals, worked collectively to apprehend the suspect or suspects. One officer from this joint task force reflected that the perpetrator struck, on average, once every 2 weeks during the spring of 1980. In May 1980, Pugh found himself incarcerated for auto theft at the Los Padrinos Juvenile Courthouse. During his stay on May 28, he caught wind of the ongoing murders through a local radio broadcast. Recognizing the modus operandi described in the broadcast, Pugh confided in a counselor, revealing that he had been briefed on a similar method by Bonin 2 months earlier. The counselor promptly reported Pugh's suspicions to the police, who, in turn, conveyed the information to LAPD Homicide Sergeant John. Acting on the confidential tip, Sergeant John conducted an extensive interview with Pugh the following day. Although Pugh omitted the detail of his involvement in one of Bonin's murders, the information provided was sufficient for Sergeant John to deduce that Bonin might be the Freeway Killer. On the very day Pugh shared information about Bonin's involvement with the police, Bonin extended an invitation to 18-year-old homeless drifter James Michael Monroe. Bonin had encountered Monroe while searching for young male prostitutes. He proposed that Monroe move into the Angel Street home, which he shared with his mother and older brother, but with a condition. The arrangement was to be in exchange for sex. Monroe, originally from Sergeant Clare, Michigan, found himself homeless after being expelled from his family's home in early 1980. Although he had initially planned to meet a friend in California, a robbery incident led him to end up living on the streets, having lost the money he had earned working as a male prostitute in Hollywood. During his stay at the Angel Street residence, Monroe, who identified as bisexual but preferred sexual relations with females, entered into a consensual sexual relationship with Bonin. Monroe also took up an offer of employment at the Montebello delivery firm where Bonin worked. Moreover, Bonin allowed Monroe to occasionally drive his van. On June 1, Bonin took Monroe and his girlfriend roller skating before abruptly informing Monroe that night that he wanted them both to abduct, sexually assault, and murder a teenage hitchhiker named Stephen Wells. Bonin and Monroe enticed the youth into the van. According to Bonin and Monroe, upon learning Wells was bisexual, Bonin engaged in consensual relations with Wells in the back of his van before persuading the youth to accompany him to his parents' house, where the two engaged in further sexual relations on Bonin's parents' bed. In the end, Bonin strangled Wells to death with a T-shirt and planned to discard his body with a cardboard box. At approximately 9 p.m., the two drove to Butt's Lakewood apartment as Bonin informed Monroe that he, Butts, and others had committed many of the Freeway Killer murders. At Butt's apartment, the trio engaged in a brief conversation before Bonin invited Butts to see Wells' body. They later drove to an abandoned gas station in Huntington Beach, where they wedged Wells' nude corpse between a chain-link fence and a truck. The body was discovered 5 hours later by 2 brothers who had parked nearby to fix a flat tire. Arrest. After 9 days of seemingly unremarkable surveillance during which Bonin maintained a routine of working a dependable drive-away, visiting friends, and returning home, a significant event unfolded on June 11, 1980. On this day, police observed Bonin driving erratically through Hollywood, attempting unsuccessfully to entice 5 separate teenage boys into his van. Eventually, he succeeded in luring the youth into his vehicle. The police trailed Bonin until his van parked at a service station near the Hollywood Freeway, discreetly approaching the vehicle. Upon hearing muffled screams and banging sounds from inside the van, plainclothes officers forcibly entered the vehicle, discovering Bonin in the act of raping 17-year-old Orange County runaway Harold Eugene Tate, whom he had handcuffed and bound. Initially charged with the rape of a minor and detained on suspicion of the murder of Miranda, Bonin was held in place of a $250,000 bond. Shortly after his arrest, Bonin's girlfriend informed his boss of the arrest, revealing its connection to the Freeway Killer case. This news left Monroe, who was already concerned about Bonin's absence from work that day, in a state of panic. The following day, Monroe stole Bonin's car and fled to his native Michigan, seeking temporary refuge with a friend before eventually facing arrest. Within Bonin's van, investigators unearthed a trove of evidence implicating him in the Freeway Killer murders. Among the discovered items were various restraining devices like lengths of nylon cord, an array of knives, a tire iron, and everyday tools such as pliers and wire coat hangers. A forensic examination of both the van's interior and later sections of Bonin's residence unveiled substantial traces of bloodstains. Notably, the inner handles from the passenger side and rear doors of the van had been removed, a deliberate move seemingly intended to thwart the victim's escape. Inside the glove box, investigators stumbled upon a scrapbook filled with newspaper clippings related to the heinous murders. During a series of confessions over several evenings, Bonin admitted to the abduction and murder of 21 young men and boys, providing increasingly graphic details. Despite showing no remorse for his gruesome actions, Bonin did exhibit intense embarrassment and regret for being apprehended. An Orange County investigator later noted that there was a collective sentiment among the law enforcement present. They all harbored a desire to bring harm to Bonin for his shocking admissions. Bonin pointed authorities to Butts as his primary accomplice in the murders, while also implicating Miley and Monroe as active accomplices in other instances of the heinous crimes. Bonin's connection to numerous murders was established through compelling physical evidence, such as blood and seminal fluid stains. Additionally, distinctive green Triskelion-shaped carpet fibers, conclusively identified as an exact match to the carpeting in the rear of Bonin's van, were found on 7 of the victims. Hair samples from 3 victims were also confirmed to be an exact match with Bonin's own hair. Further solidifying the case, medical evidence disclosed that a distinctive windlass strangulation method was employed in 6 of the charged murders, later described by the prosecutor in Bonin's Los Angeles County trial as his signature or trademark. Initially arraigned for the murder of Grabs on July 25, Bonin found himself facing additional charges by July 29. Confessing to 15 more murders, he was formally charged, and the prosecution believed they had ample evidence to secure convictions for all 16 cases. Alongside the murder charges, Bonin faced accusations of 11 counts of robbery, 1 count of sodomy, and 1 count of mayhem, leading to his incarceration without bond. On August 8, all charges were officially filed against Bonin. Following the provisions of Penal Code Section 987, Bonin, who was without legal representation at this stage, was assigned attorney Earl Hansen on August 11 to serve as his legal counsel. Hansen remained Bonin's attorney until October 1981 when, at Bonin's request, he was replaced by William Charvet and Tracy Stewart. Bonin, along with 3 of his 4 known accomplices, was convicted of 14 murders that occurred between August 5, 1979, and June 2, 1980. Additionally, Bonin faced charges for 2 more murders, but he was acquitted in his first trial in Los Angeles County. Out of the 14 murders for which Bonin was convicted, 10 took place in Los Angeles County and 4 in nearby Orange County. Suspected of being involved in at least 21 murders, Bonin was subsequently sentenced to death and placed on death row. Death row. Following his transfer to San Quentin State Prison, Bonin formed close bonds with fellow serial killer Lawrence Bittaker, a relationship that originated during their shared incarceration at the Los Angeles County Jail. Additionally, he became acquainted with other convicted murderers, including Randy Kraft, another individual bearing the Freeway Killer moniker alongside Bonin, Douglas Clark, and Jimmy Lee Smith. During his years on death row, Bonin engaged in painting and writing as personal pursuits. He authored a series of short stories titled Doing Time, Stories from the Mind of a Death Row Prisoner, with an initial print run of 50 copies, each priced at $13. He also harbored aspirations of publishing a science fiction novel. Throughout this period, Bonin received several minor awards for his artistic endeavors, short stories, and poems. However, Bonin was later executed by lethal injection inside the gas chamber at San Quentin State Prison on February 23, 1996. Notably, he was the first person to be executed by lethal injection in the history of California. His execution took place 14 years after the initial imposition of his first death sentence. All right, guys, that wraps up our video for today. If you found this informative, please do well to give us a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and watch out for more.